The day I buried my wife, my sons said they couldn't come. That evening, a note slipped under my door. No signature, no explanation. Just one sentence. What your sons really buried at the cemetery today. The next afternoon, I sat across from my neighbor at a cafe table I'd never expected to share with anyone. He placed a photograph between our coffee cups without a word. My sons, standing beside my wife's fresh grave, smiling, holding a metal box. I couldn't speak. He leaned in quietly. I have something worse. Do you want to see it? Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between protecting family and doing what's right? Drop a comment below. Your thoughts matter here. Just so you know, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. But the core message about truth, family, and justice is what really matters. I buried my wife on a Wednesday morning in November, and the two people who should have been standing beside me were somewhere else entirely. The Florida sun blazed over Gulf Memorial Gardens Cemetery, like it had forgotten this was supposed to be somber. At 64, I stood beside Martha's grave in my dark suit, a retired civil engineer who'd spent 3 decades building bridges, but couldn't build a bridge to my absent sons. Martha, my wife of 34 years, a 62-year-old woman who taught 3rd graders to read and kept every scrap of paper that might someday matter, lay in that mahogany casket while I counted empty folding chairs. 2 chairs, 2 sons, 0 acceptable excuses. Elio had called the night before from Miami. Dad, I'm so sorry. This business deal, if I don't close it today, we lose everything. Mom would understand. His voice carried that smooth corporate certainty that always made me want to check my wallet. Hamish called 30 minutes later from Orlando. Client emergency, I have to be in court tomorrow morning or they'll lose custody of their kids. I can't make it. He'd sounded genuinely broken, which somehow made it worse. Identical timing, different cities, perfectly coordinated absence. My engineering mind, trained to spot structural weaknesses, cataloged the wrongness like a defect in a blueprint. Sons don't miss their mother's funeral for business deals, not unless something's already broken that I hadn't noticed. Philip Connolly stood near the grave's edge, 70 years old, and lean as a fence post, his weathered face creased with genuine sorrow. He'd managed Gulf Memorial Gardens for 35 years and remembered Martha teaching him to read in 1963. She taught me to sound out words in 3rd grade, Mr. Hewitt, he said quietly, hat in his hands. I never forgot her patience. Pastor Morrison from St. Timothy's stood at the casket's head, white hair brilliant against black vestments. He'd known Martha from her volunteer work with the literacy program. Martha gave 34 years of love to this community, he told the handful of mourners. She believed everyone deserved the dignity of reading their own story. Mrs. Torres from 2 doors down had brought a casserole that morning and squeezed my hand without words. She sat in the front row now, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. 34 years of marriage, 2 sons. 0 excuses are good enough. What kind of business deal is worth missing your mother's funeral? What kind of emergency is more important than goodbye? I'd built suspension bridges across rivers, calculated load-bearing capacities for structures that would outlive me, but I couldn't calculate the mathematics of this absence. The service lasted 23 minutes. Pastor Morrison spoke about Martha's gentle persistence, her meticulous record-keeping, her belief that literacy was dignity. The November breeze carried the salt smell of the Gulf 2 miles west, mixing with fresh-turned earth and funeral flowers. I felt the sun hot on my neck, heard distant traffic on Tamiami Trail, watched a mockingbird land on a nearby headstone. When they lowered the casket, I stood alone at the grave's edge and didn't cry. Engineers don't cry at funerals. We calculate the volume of the hole, estimate the weight of the coffin, and wonder about soil compression rates. We do anything except feel the emptiness spreading like a crack through concrete. I drove home to our house on Pelican Bay Drive, that 2-story Mediterranean revival we'd bought in 2013 when I retired. The silence inside felt solid, measurable. Martha's reading glasses still sat on the kitchen counter, folded beside the crossword puzzle she'd never finish. Her coffee cup rested in the dish drainer, a faint lipstick mark on the rim. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. Her small office off the hallway still smelled like lavender hand cream and old paper. I started packing slowly, books first, then filing cabinet drawers stuffed with decades of teaching materials. In the storage closet, pushed behind 3 boxes of lesson plans, I found her old wooden chest. 40 years of documents, maybe more. Martha never threw anything away. Tax returns from the 80s, receipts for long-sold cars, contracts from construction jobs I'd worked before my sons were born. I lifted the lid and saw folders labeled in her precise handwriting, 1985 Crawford Madden files, insurance policies, 1990 to 2000, property deeds. Her voice echoed in my memory, clear as if she stood beside me. Promise me, Vernon, never throw away old paperwork. You never know when truth needs proof. I'd laughed at the time, called her a pack rat, teased her about saving grocery receipts from 1987, but she'd been serious. Those green eyes had held mine with teaching intensity. Promise me. What did you know? I whispered to the empty room. What were you saving me from? I closed the chest and pushed it back into the corner. Not yet. I'd know when the time came to open it. Martha had taught me to trust her instincts even when I didn't understand them. At sunset, I heard a soft rustling at the front door, paper sliding across the tile. By the time I pulled it open, the porch stood empty, painted orange by dying light. But there on the doormat, folded once, lay a cream-colored note in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. What your sons really buried at the cemetery today. I read aloud, my voice strange in the empty house. The words felt like a physical weight. Someone had been there. Someone had watched. No signature, no explanation. Just that single poisonous sentence that rewrote the entire day. What they really buried. Not who sent this. Not why. What did my sons bury? I read it 4 times, my hand steady, despite the adrenaline sharpening my thinking into the cold precision I'd used for 40 years of engineering problems. Someone had been watching my family closely enough to know what Elio and Hamish had done that very afternoon. While I stood at their mother's funeral, they'd been at that same cemetery burying something they didn't want me to find. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar, careful script of someone educated, deliberate. Someone who wanted me to know they'd been watching. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my shirt pocket, feeling it rest against my chest like evidence waiting to be examined. I already knew I would be at that cafe at 2 o'clock tomorrow. When someone you've never met knows more about your children than you do, which failure is greater, theirs for the deception or yours for missing it? I stood at the kitchen counter under the fluorescent light, the cream-colored note spread flat against the granite like evidence at a crime scene. The handwriting was precise, unhurried, someone who'd taken time to craft each letter. The paper itself felt expensive between my fingers, a weight and texture that suggested stationery kept in a desk drawer, not grabbed in haste. Someone had been there. Someone had watched. I stepped onto the front porch, letting the screen door close softly behind me. November evening had settled over Pelican Bay Drive, warm and humid, carrying the distant sound of sprinklers and the salt smell from the Gulf. Streetlights flickered on in sequence down the block, illuminating the manicured lawns and Spanish tile roofs of my neighbors' lives. That's when I saw it. 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street, a dark sedan sat parked beneath a live oak. I'd registered it that morning in the vague peripheral way. You notice cars in your neighborhood, just another vehicle, nothing remarkable. But now 12 hours later, it hasn't moved. Florida plates, tinted windows, engine cold. Someone had been watching since before the funeral. My engineer's mind clicked into the methodical cataloging mode I'd used for 40 years of structural analysis. Dark blue or black sedan, late model, positioned with a clear sightline to both my driveway and the cemetery access road, visible from that angle. Whoever sent the note hadn't just observed, they'd positioned themselves to track movements, to document timing, to know exactly when my sons had done whatever they'd done. Whoever sent this was there, I said to the humid air, watching us, watching them. Yeah, and I went back inside and locked the door. In the living room, I tried to eat the casserole Mrs. Torres had brought, but my stomach rejected the kindness. I sat in Martha's chair instead, the worn leather recliner where she'd graded papers for 30 years, and let my mind work backward through the timeline. March. The memory surfaced with sudden clarity. Elio sitting at this same kitchen table 8 months ago, his laptop open, an expensive suit jacket draped over the chair back. He'd driven up from Miami on a Tuesday afternoon, unusual enough that Martha had made coffee and set out the good cookies. Just inflation, protection, dad. His voice echoed in my memory, smooth and confident. Standard practice for your asset level. You've got the Naples property, the investments, the retirement accounts. Your current life insurance hasn't increased since 2010. $2 million doesn't cover what you've built. Martha had leaned over his shoulder, reading the policy documents with her teacher's careful attention. 6 million seems like a lot, Elio. It's proportional to your estate value, he'd assured her. And the premiums are negligible for your age and health. You're both in excellent condition. I'd felt proud that day. Proud that my son had the financial sophistication to think ahead to protect his parents. Our son knows his business, I'd told Martha after he left. We should listen. She'd signed the documents without hesitation, so had I. Now sitting in her empty chair with a stranger's note in my pocket, I did the math with cold precision. March 2024, insurance increased from 2 million to 6 million. November 2024, Martha dead at 62. 8 months between the policy change and her death. Long enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Long enough to look like natural timing. Long enough to plan. You think you know your children. You watch them learn to walk, to read, to drive. You taught them to tie their shoes and balance checkbooks and treat people with respect. You never imagine you might need to learn when they're lying. You never develop that particular expertise because the foundation of family is supposed to be trust. And once you start auditing trust, what's left? But I was auditing now. Midnight found me in our bedroom, lying on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that now felt like a stranger's breathing. Martha's side of the bed lay undisturbed, her reading light still angled toward the pillow she'd never use again. My mind built decision trees the way I'd built bridge diagrams for 3 decades. Option 1, go to the police now. Result dismissed for insufficient evidence, a note from an anonymous source, a parked car, a coincidental timing of insurance and death. No prosecutor would touch it. Option 2, ignore the note, pretend I never received it. Result, if my sons had actually done something criminal, they might accelerate whatever plan remained. Unacceptable risk. Option 3, meet the sender tomorrow at Riverside Cafe. Result, gather more data. Understand what they know. Maintain control of information flow before making the next move. Optimal path, meet the sender. But there was something else my engineer's mind was doing now, something darker. I was cataloging Martha's decline with new eyes. January's sudden weakness she'd attributed to winter blues. March, unexplained nausea that her doctor couldn't diagnose. June, fatigue so profound she'd stopped volunteering at the literacy center. October, the rapid deterioration that led to hospice, to morphine, to that final Wednesday morning. The pattern I'd attributed to aggressive cancer now looked different. It looked deliberate. It looked like a timeline someone had engineered. In engineering, we call it load-bearing failure, the moment when invisible cracks suddenly matter, when stress that seemed sustainable yesterday becomes catastrophic today, when the structure you trusted implicitly reveals it was compromised all along and you just didn't know which questions to ask. 34 years of marriage teaches you patterns, I whispered to the dark ceiling. I knew something was wrong, I just didn't ask the right question. The right question wasn't what's making her sick, it was who. By 2 a.m., I'd made my decision. Tomorrow I would meet whoever had been watching my family, closely enough to know what my sons buried. The note sat on the nightstand, cream paper, glowing faintly in the darkness from the streetlight outside. Riverside Cafe, 5th Avenue South, 2 p.m. I already knew I wouldn't tell anyone I was going. Because if my sons had killed their mother, I needed to know everything before I destroyed them. The hardest person to recognize is the one you've seen every morning for 11 years, but never once looked at. I walked into Riverside Cafe at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, for a meeting that might confirm my sons were murderers. The November heat yielded to air conditioning that smelled like espresso and cinnamon. I scanned faces, tourists with phones, elderly couples sharing newspapers, construction workers on lunch break, looking for threats I couldn't name. The cafe occupied a renovated bungalow on 5th Avenue South, exposed brick and reclaimed wood windows facing the street. I chose a corner table with clear sight lines to the entrance and both exits. My engineer's mind mapped the space: 12 tables, 8 occupied, 1 restroom, kitchen behind swinging doors, fire exit in back. A server appeared mid-40s with tired eyes. "Coffee hon? Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes," I said, "I am." She poured without asking how I took it. I was waiting for whoever knew what my sons did yesterday. The coffee sat, untouched steam rising like a countdown. Each minute stretched. I checked my watch: 1:52, 1:56, 1:59. At exactly 2 p.m. a man entered. 67, maybe older. Gray hair swept back from a lined face. Simple clothes, khaki pants, navy polo, practical shoes. Sharp eyes that scanned the cafe the same way mine had found me immediately. But it was his face that stopped my breath. I knew that face. I'd seen it every morning for 11 years. The neighbor 3 houses down who collected mail at 7 a.m., watered plants at 6 p.m., drove a gray Volvo with meticulous care. We'd waved across driveways perhaps 200 times. We'd taken in each other's packages when delivery drivers chose wrong porches. We nodded hello at neighborhood meetings. Neither of us attended regularly. We'd lived 3 houses apart for 11 years, and I'd never learned his name. He walked directly to my table with rehearsed certainty. Up close, I saw exhaustion carved into his features, the weight of whatever he carried, making him older than his years. "Mr. Hewitt," he said, voice quiet and precise. "I'm Leland. I live 3 houses down from you." "I know your face," I managed. "I never knew your name." "We've been neighbors for 11 years, Leland said, pulling out the chair without invitation. "I know everything about your family." The words should have sounded like a threat. Instead, they sounded like exhaustion. How many strangers live 3 doors down from you? How many people do you see every single day without ever seeing them at all? I'd waved to this man 200 mornings. I'd watched him load groceries, walk his route around the block at sunset, maintain his lawn with the same methodical precision I recognized in myself. And I'd never once wondered who he was. Leland sat down, ordered nothing when the server approached. He waited until she walked away. "I moved to Pelican Bay Drive in 2013 specifically to watch you," he said. "To wait for the right moment." My chest tightened. "Moment for what?" "To show you what your sons are." His hands rested flat on the table, steady, despite what had to be racing through him. "Before they kill you too." The cafe, noise conversation, espresso machine, 80s music from ceiling speakers faded to background static. I heard my own breathing too fast. Felt the table's edge pressing against my forearms. Smelled the coffee I hadn't touched growing cold. "Why?" The question came out rough. "Why watch me for 11 years?" "Because of 1985, Leland said. "Because of what happened between you and my father, Reginald Madden." The name hit like a physical blow. Reginald Madden, my business partner for 6 years in the 80s, Crawford Madden Construction. The company that dissolved in 1985 under circumstances that still made my hands shake. The partnership that cost me $100,000 and nearly destroyed my early career. "Your father," I repeated. Leland's jaw tightened. "I was 42 when I buried him. I've spent 40 years understanding what you did to my family. The surveillance, the note, the dark sedan. Not random. Deliberate observation by a man nursing a 40-year grudge, living 3 houses away, watching and waiting." "I didn't bankrupt your father," I said, but the protest sounded weak. "The market collapsed. We both lost." "I'm not here to debate 1985. Leland cut me off. "I'm here because yesterday afternoon, while you drove home from your wife's funeral, your sons returned to Gulf Memorial Gardens Cemetery. They waited until the ground crew left at 3:30. Then they buried something next to her grave. Some people orbit your life for years, like distant planets, visible, predictable, utterly unknown. They exist in your peripheral vision, part of the landscape you navigate without noticing, until the day their orbit intersects with yours and you realize they've been watching the entire time, tracking your movements, waiting for the moment to reveal. They know things about you that you don't know yourself." Leland reached into his jacket. I tensed some animal part of my brain, expecting a weapon. But what he pulled out was a brown manila envelope creased from carrying the clasp, worn from opening and closing. He placed it carefully on the table between our coffee cups. His hand trembled slightly, the first sign he was human, not just a watching ghost. "I have photographs," Leland said, "taken yesterday afternoon at Gulf Memorial Gardens." I stared at the envelope. Inside were images that would prove something I already believed but hadn't wanted to face. Proof my sons had used their mother's funeral to hide evidence. Proof they'd calculated her death precisely enough to plan for contingencies. "Then show me," I said. Leland's fingers rested on one corner of the envelope. "Once you see these, you can't unsee them. You understand that the sixth west do el world." "I understand." The envelope sat between us on the cafe table, brown manila against white laminate. Leland's fingers still rested on one corner, as if he might take it back, as if he might spare me. But we both knew I had to look. I had to see what my sons had done at their mother's grave while I drove home alone. Some photographs destroy you instantly. Others take exactly 3 seconds the time it takes your brain to understand what your eyes refuse to believe. I opened the envelope with hands steadier than my heartbeat. The photographs slid onto the white cafe table like evidence at trial. 5 prints, glossy professional quality. The first one stopped my breathing. Elio and Hamish, Martha's grave, November 13th, 3:47 p.m. I read the timestamp aloud, needing to hear it confirmed. 3:47 p.m., November 13th. While you were home grieving, Leland said quietly, they were burying evidence. The funeral had ended at 10:45. I'd driven home by 11:20, sat in Martha's chair trying to process the emptiness. At 3:47 p.m., 2.5 hours after I'd left the cemetery, my sons had returned. But they weren't mourning. Elio knelt beside the fresh grave holding a small metal box, maybe 6 inches square. His face, captured in perfect telephoto clarity, wore an expression I'd never seen: relief mixed with accomplishment. Hamish stood 3 feet away, not looking at his brother, but scanning the cemetery perimeter, his posture alert, purposeful. They were working. And that's not grief on their faces, I said. The words felt distant, analytical. That's a job completed. Leland said nothing, let me process. I spread the remaining 4 photographs across the table. Different angles, different moments of the same operation. Photo 2. Elio digging a shallow hole beside Martha's headstone, the metal box visible on the grass. Photo 3. Hamish's hand on his phone, checking something, the time maybe, or confirming no witnesses approached. Photo 4. The box being lowered into the hole, Elio's fingers careful, deliberate. Photo 5. Dirt being replaced, smoothed, camouflaged. Professional coordination, methodical execution. Not the fumbling of amateurs caught in crisis, but the practiced efficiency of people following a plan. You took these from where? I asked, my voice strange in my own ears. How close were you? Behind the oak tree 50 yards northwest, Leland said. I've been photographing your family for months. My sons buried something with their mother. While I wept, they worked. Have you ever seen your child's face and not recognized the person behind it? Have you ever realized the stranger isn't new? You've just been blind. I'd looked at Elio and Hamish every day of their lives, changed their diapers, taught them to ride bikes, helped them with calculus homework, watched them grow into men I thought I knew. I'd never seen these faces. I'd never seen this cold purpose, this relief at completing a criminal task. They'd worn masks for me their entire lives, and I'd never noticed. Leland reached for his phone, tapped the screen with practiced movements, then slid it across the table. I have something worse, he said. Do you want to see it? Show me everything. The video played automatically. 43 seconds. Timestamp. March 15th, 2024, 10:22 a.m. The angle showed it was filmed through a window. My kitchen window, I realized with a jolt, looking into the small hallway where Martha kept her medications. Elio stood at the cabinet, his back to the camera. He opened a small glass vial, held it up to the light, as if checking contents, then systematically opened 3 prescription bottles. His hand moved with practiced precision, adding drops to each, not hesitating, not fumbling. Routine. This wasn't the first time. March 15th, 8 months before Martha died. 8 months of systematic poisoning disguised as cancer decline. I watched the video twice without breathing. The second time, I noticed details, the way Elio checked over his shoulder before starting the careful replacement of bottles to their exact positions, the casual way he pocketed the vial and walked out of frame. Someone who'd done this many times. Someone who knew his mother's medication schedule, knew when she'd be in the garden, knew exactly how long he had. Someone who'd planned this for months. I set the phone face down on the table, felt the cool laminate under my palms, heard the espresso machine hissing behind the counter, smelled burnt coffee and someone's cinnamon roll. The cafe continued around us, tourists laughing, a child asking for more sugar, someone's ringtone playing classic rock. 30 seconds, I said. I need 30 seconds. Leland nodded once. I counted, my engineer's mind rebuilding reality from shattered assumptions. Martha's January weakness, March nausea, June fatigue, October's rapid deterioration. Not cancer's natural progression, but an engineered timeline. The life insurance increased in March, the same month Elio started poisoning her. 8 months to establish a pattern, make it look like illness, ensured doctors wouldn't question. At 30 seconds, I looked up. I waited 11 years, Leland said quietly. 30 seconds is nothing. The video kept looping on the phone between us. Elio's hand steady as a surgeon's adding poison to medicine, meant to heal his mother. Each drop is measured. Each movement is calculated. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" Leland's face changed. The exhausted certainty hardened into something older, deeper. 40 years of compressed rage showing through cracks in his controlled exterior. "Why do I care what happens to your family?" he repeated. "Because 40 years ago, you destroyed mine." He reached for his wallet, pulled out a photograph, so worn the edges had softened. The colors had that faded quality of film from the 80s, too warm, slightly oversaturated. He placed it beside the photos of my sons. Two men in hard hats stood at a construction site, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera like brothers. One was me, 39 years old, leaner but recognizable. The other was a stranger I hadn't thought about in decades. "Crawford Madden Construction," Leland said. 1985. You remember my father, Reginald A. The photograph showed two men in 1985, partners, friends, builders. I recognized my younger self, immediately 39 years old, standing at a construction site that would soon become my greatest failure. The man beside me, arm around my shoulder, was Reginald Madden, Leland's father, and according to the son sitting across from me, I had killed him. How long can you hate someone for something they didn't do before the hatred becomes who you are? Leland's finger rested on the 1985 photograph, two young men in hard hats, partners who had no idea what was coming. Crawford Madden Construction. Leland said, his voice steady with 40 years of practice. 6 years of partnership, profitable until 1984. Then the recession hit. I remembered. The market collapse that had nearly destroyed everything. My father came home in March 1985, broken. Leland continued. Told us you'd taken $60,000 from the business account. Money that was supposed to save the partnership, keep the crew paid, finish the contracts. He said you used it to save your own house while the company collapsed. That's not... I started, but Leland raised a hand. Let me finish. I sat back, jaw tight. Reginald Madden, Leland's father, and my business partner, had died by suicide, believing I'd embezzled from our failing construction company. Everything he'd believed was wrong, but I couldn't say that yet. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I spent 40 years understanding what you did to my family, Leland said. Building a case, tracking your life, waiting for the right moment to destroy you the way you destroyed him. He pulled his phone back, gathered the photographs of my sons at Martha's grave, stacked them precisely. In 2013, I learned you'd retired to Naples. I found a house 3 doors down from yours. I moved there specifically to watch you, to document everything, to wait for the perfect moment of revenge. 11 years, my neighbor for 11 years, and every wave, every polite nod had been part of a 40-year plan. I planned to destroy you quietly, Leland said. Over the years, the way you destroyed him, make you lose everything slowly enough that you'd feel every piece break. He tapped the phone screen, bringing up the video of Elio poisoning Martha's medications. Then in March, I saw your son through your kitchen window doing something wrong. By April, I knew he was poisoning his own mother. My chest tightened. You've had that video since April. 6 months. You waited. I did. No apology in his voice. I realized your children were doing my work for me. Why interfere when your own sons would take everything you loved? Can you spend 40 years hating someone for a lie and still call it justice? Or does the duration of the hatred matter more than its truth? Leland had nursed this grudge longer than my sons had been alive. It had outlasted his marriage, shaped where he lived, and determined how he spent his retirement. Revenge hadn't been his project, it had been his purpose. But you're here now, I said, warning me instead of watching me die. Why? Leland was quiet for a long moment. The cafe sounds filled the space, espresso machine, hissing, a child's laughter, someone's phone ringing. Yesterday, I watched you bury your wife alone, he said finally. Your sons didn't come. I stood by that oak tree with my camera, and I saw your face when you realized both chairs were empty. He looked at his hands, weathered and age-spotted like mine. I came here planning to watch you squirm, to show you the photos and the video, then sit back while you break. Why didn't you? Because I kept watching. I realized they're not just stealing from you. They're going to kill you next. Frame you for everything, make it look like you murdered your own wife, then take the insurance money and walk away. Leland's jaw worked like the words tasted bitter. 40 years I've wanted you to suffer for what you did to my father. But whatever happened in 1985, you don't deserve what they're planning. Nobody does. Some grudges are like concrete. The longer they set, the harder they become. To break even when you learn, the foundation was sand. Leland had spent 40 years building this hatred into something solid, structural, load-bearing. Now, his own conscience was asking him to tear it down. Your father, I said carefully. The bankruptcy. What you think I did. We'll address all of it. I have documentation you need to see, but not today. I gathered the photographs, stacked them, precisely slid them back into the envelope. Today we found out what my son's buried with my wife. Everything else waits. Leland studied my face. Do you have documentation? 40 years worth. My wife never threw anything away. I thought of Martha's wooden chest, those labeled folders gathering dust. She kept every receipt, every contract, every bank record from 1985. She insisted I never discard them. Why would she? I don't know, but I'm starting to understand she knew things I didn't. Leland nodded slowly. Agreed. The dead can wait. The living can't. We left the cafe together, walked to the parking lot in tense silence. The November heat pressed down air thick with salt and impending rain. I pulled out my phone, found Philip Connolly's number. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Hewitt. Philip, I need a favor. Tonight. It's about Martha. Anything. I explained carefully emergency access to the cemetery. After dark couldn't involve police, yet needed his discretion and his help. Philip's voice softened. For Miss Hewitt, anything. She taught me to read in 1963. I'll be at the North Service Gate at midnight. Thank you. I turned to Leland, who stood beside his dark sedan, the car that had been parked 3 houses down for 11 years. You've watched my family for 11 years, I said. Tonight you see what they really are. Midnight Gulf, Memorial Gardens, North Gate. Leland nodded once. I'll be there. I sat in my car watching him drive away the sedan, disappearing down Fifth Avenue into afternoon traffic. In 8 hours, we would meet at the cemetery and dig up whatever my sons had buried. Everything I thought I knew about my family had shattered in 3 hours at a cafe. What we'd find at midnight would either prove me right or destroy what little remained. I started the engine and thought of Martha's document box waiting at home in the storage closet. 40 years she'd kept those files. 40 years of paperwork about a partnership that had cost me everything and apparently cost Leland's father his life. Somehow she'd known. Somehow she'd always known I'd need proof. There are things you do in darkness that you could never justify in daylight, and digging up your wife's grave ranks high among them. I arrived at Gulf Memorial Gardens North Service Gate at 11:55 p.m., parking in the shadows of a live oak where streetlights couldn't reach my license plate. The 8 hours since leaving the cafe had passed in a strange suspension. I'd eaten. Nothing, slept nothing, just sat in Martha's chair thinking about what we were about to do. Philip's white pickup truck appeared at 11:58, headlights off, as he coasted to the curb. Through my rearview mirror, I watched him retrieve 2 shovels from the truck bed and an industrial flashlight that probably cost more than my first car. 70 years old, and still moving with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 3 decades managing this place. Leland's dark sedan pulled up at exactly midnight. We converged at the gate without speaking. 3 men in our 60s and 70s, about to commit what would technically be classified as grave desecration. Philip held up a key ring that caught the moonlight. I brought 2 shovels, he said quietly. Figured we'd take turns. How long will this take? Leland asked. I looked at Martha's grave marker visible in the distance, a pale rectangle against dark grass. However long it takes, we're not leaving without answers. Philip unlocked the service gate with keys he technically no longer had authority to use. He'd retired as cemetery manager in 2019, but apparently kept copies. The gate swung open on well-oiled hinges, silent as conspiracy. We walked single file through the cemetery. Philip led flashlight beam trained on the path ahead, using a mental map memorized over 35 years of this work. The November Florida night pressed around us, warm, humid, the Gulf breeze 2 miles west, carrying salt and night-blooming jasmine. Our footsteps on grass sounded too loud in my ears, each step a small transgression multiplying towards something larger. I passed graves of people Martha had known. Mrs. Torres's husband died 3 years before we moved to Pelican Bay Drive, the Morrison family plot where Pastor Morrison's parents rested. Each headstone was a reminder that this was sacred ground we were about to violate. Section C, row 12. Philip said, his voice barely above a whisper. I remember exactly where I laid her. Well, 35 years you've done this work, I said. Tonight I'm asking you to undo it. For Miss Hewitt, Philip said simply. She taught me more than reading. She taught me that truth matters. Leland walked beside me, hands in his pockets, scanning the darkness like he expected security guards to materialize. Anyone else feel like we're committing a crime? We are, I said. But sometimes you choose between two kinds of wrong and hope you pick the lesser. Have you ever violated something sacred for a reason you believed it was more sacred still? Have you ever chosen between two kinds of wrong and hoped you picked the lesser? I'd spent 40 years following rules, building things to code, trusting that systems worked if you worked them honestly. Tonight I was breaking every principle I'd built my career on, and I'd never been more certain of anything. The flashlight beam found Martha's headstone. Marble, simple. The inscription I'd chosen just 5 days ago. Martha Hewitt, beloved wife and teacher. 1962 to 2024. Fresh flowers from the funeral lay wilted in the Florida heat, their colors muted in the darkness. The grass hadn't fully rooted yet. The earth still showed disturbance from burial. We stood in a triangle formation around the grave. None of us moved first. And Martha would understand why we're doing this. I said, reading the inscription aloud like a prayer or an apology. Philip pointed the flashlight 3 feet to the right of the headstone. The photos showed them digging here. That's where we start. Leland looked at me across Martha's grave. Once we do this, Mr. Hewitt, we can't undo it. I know. I took the first shovel needed to be the one who started this. The blade cut into Florida soil, sandy and loose, nothing like the packed earth covering Martha's casket 6 feet down. We were digging shallow where my sons had been photographed working. The shovel bit into earth with a sound that felt obscenely loud. "Oh, forgive me, Martha," I whispered to the ground. "This is for you as much as for me." Philip held the flashlight steady, creating a circle of illumination in the darkness. Leland watched for security patrols that never came. The cemetery closed at sunset, and no one checked the grounds until dawn. Vernon and Philip traded the shovel every 50 scoops, working methodically. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the night air. After 20 minutes, Philip paused mid-dig. "Soil's looser than it should be here. They definitely disturbed this section recently." "How deep did the photos suggest?" Leland asked. "Shallow," I said. "They were rushed, working fast before someone saw them. Sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to disturb their rest, because the living buried lies alongside the body." Martha had kept 40 years of documents because she knew truth needed proof. Now I was digging beside her grave because my sons had buried their lives with her. My shovel struck something solid at 60 centimeters, barely 2 feet down. The sound metal on metal, a dull clang that stopped my breath. All 3 of us froze. Philip trained the flashlight into the hole we'd created. In the beam corner of an aluminum box, maybe 8 inches square, exactly where Leland's photographs had shown Elio kneeling. There, I said, "right there." Philip leaned closer, flashlight steady. "Aluminum, commercial grade, waterproof seal." Leland knelt beside the hole, his voice tight. "That's it. That's what they buried while you drove home alone. Shallower than I'd expected. Sons who were rushing, not careful. Or sons who planned to return and retrieve it quickly when needed. The depth told its own story, buried deep enough to avoid casual discovery, shallow enough for fast recovery. My sons had been planning ahead. The flashlight beam caught the corner of brushed aluminum, a manufactured object that had no business existing beside my wife's casket. Philip and Leland knelt beside me as I brushed away the remaining dirt with my bare hands. The metal was cold smooth, sealed tight against moisture and time. Whatever my sons had hidden here 2 days ago was about to become visible, and there would be no unseeing it. The box opened with a soft click, and inside was everything I needed to prove my sons were murderers and nothing I wanted to believe was true. I broke the waterproof seal with fingers that had stopped shaking. The lid lifted smoothly, commercial grade, designed to protect contents from moisture and time. Philip trained his flashlight directly into the cavity. 2 small glass vials lay nestled in foam, packing clear liquid inside, completely unlabeled. Medical-grade glass. Beside them, a thick manila envelope sealed with duct tape. Everything wrapped in plastic for additional waterproofing. This wasn't panicked burial. It was methodical storage. "Glass vials," Leland said, leaning close. "Medical grade, no labels." I lifted one, carefully held it to Philip's flashlight. The liquid caught the beam, refracted it. Clear as water, but thicker viscous. Whatever they used on Martha, I said, they kept samples. Philip's voice came out hoarse. Why would they keep evidence of murder? Insurance, Leland said. Sometimes you need proof of what you did even if that proof could destroy you. I set the vial back and reached for the manila envelope. The duct tape peeled away with a sound too loud in the cemetery silence. Inside, multiple pages. Professional printing expensive paper stock. A will, 4 pages, dated October 15th, 2024, 3 weeks before Martha died. Keep reading, Leland said quietly. I scanned the distribution clause. I hereby bequeath my entire estate, valued at approximately $9 million, to my eldest son, Elio Hewitt, in recognition of his financial acumen and dedication to family prosperity. My entire estate. The life insurance we'd increased in March, $6 million. The Naples property, $2.8 million. All investments, retirement accounts, everything we'd built. To Elio exclusively. And Hamish gets nothing, I said, flipping through pages. His own brother was cutting him out too. Leland pointed to the bottom. Notary seal from Patricia Westbrook, Naples County. Real notary. Fake document with real seal. I stared at my signature at the bottom of each page. Perfect. The slight rightward slant I developed after my third finger broke in 1998. The way my V looped wider than standard. The precise pressure that made the J and James darker. The forged signature looked more like mine than signatures I'd actually written. Someone had studied my hand for months, practicing until the forgery became more real than the original. Elio had access to decades of my paperwork, every contract, every birthday card. Time and motivation to become me on paper. A small piece of paper fell from between the will pages. Different size, different texture. I caught it before it hit the ground. Handwriting I recognized instantly Hamish's smaller, hurried script. Just 2 lines and a phone number, insurance adjuster. Call me. Date written in corner, October 22nd, 2024. 1 week after the forged will was created. This isn't Elio's handwriting, I said, holding it to the light. It's Hamish's. Leland took it, carefully read it twice. Your younger son knew what was happening. He was protecting himself. I thought of Hamish at Martha's funeral. The empty chair, the coordinated excuse. Not grief keeping him away. Fear. Not of getting caught, of being betrayed by his own brother. He'd participated in poisoning our mother, but he'd known Elio was planning to cut him out. So Hamish had created insurance, slipped his own note into the burial box without Elio knowing. A contingency plan hidden inside a conspiracy. We sat back on the grass, evidence spread between us under Philip's flashlight. The November night pressed around us warm and thick with humidity and jasmine. My engineer mind cataloged the architecture of betrayal. Elio planned to kill both parents and frame me for Martha's murder. Hamish participated, but secretly documented everything as insurance against his own brother. Brothers conspiring against parents while betraying each other. Elio was going to kill me, I said, working through the logic. Frame me for Martha's murder with this forged will as motive, then cut Hamish out entirely. And Hamish knew it, Leland confirmed. That note was his contingency. Philip's voice cracked. Family shouldn't be like this. This isn't what Miss Hewitt taught. Have you ever held physical proof that someone you raised planned your death with the same attention to detail you taught them to apply to everything? The vials sitting in foam packing. The forged will with my perfect signature. The calculated timeline from March to November. I'd taught Elio to plan, to think ahead, to anticipate problems. He'd applied those lessons to murdering his parents. Got we here? I asked. Why bury evidence at the cemetery instead of destroying it? Philip set down his flashlight, wiped sweat from his forehead. 35 years managing Gulf Memorial Gardens had taught him things I'd never considered. Insurance companies and police search homes within 72 hours of suspicious death or major claim. He said, standard anti-fraud protocol in Florida. They go through everything, closets, attics, storage units. But cemetery graves, different jurisdiction. You need a specific warrant based on probable cause, signed by a judge willing to order exhumation. Leland nodded slowly. Temporary storage. They plan to retrieve it after the investigation passed. Smart and sick. The cemetery was a legal blind spot, I said. Evidence could hide for the critical first week, while attention focused on our house, our accounts, our lives. We repacked everything carefully. Vials cushioned in foam forged will, in its envelope Hamish's note between the pages. Leland photographed each item with his phone before we returned it to the box. Philip explained what I already knew. This box dug from a cemetery without warrant would be challenged in any court. The evidence was real, but the chain of custody was broken before we'd even found it. If I wanted justice, I'd need something better than a midnight grave robbery. The worst enemy to face is the one you trained yourself, because they know exactly how you think, and they've been studying your weaknesses their entire life. We stood beside Philip's white pickup truck under the parking lot lights at 1 a.m. 3 men, who just committed grave desecration, holding evidence that couldn't be used in any courtroom. The cemetery box sat in Philip's truck bed, reburied dirt, still clinging to its sides. Your son knew exactly what he was doing. Philip said, his voice carrying the weight of 35 years in the burial business. This wasn't desperate, it was designed. The 72-hour window, the jurisdiction boundaries, the retrieval timeline. He mapped every variable. Leland leaned against his sedan, arms crossed. He mapped the gaps in the system the way you'd map structural weaknesses in a building. Found where oversight breaks down, where authority fragments. I stared at the cemetery gate thinking of Martha's grave beyond it. I taught him to think like this. Problem solution, variables, execution. It's how I taught him to approach everything. And now he's using it to kill you, Leland said quietly. Philip touched the aluminum box like it might contaminate him. The burial depth 60 centimeters, not deeper. That's deliberate. Deep enough a casual groundskeeper wouldn't notice disturbance, shallow enough for quick retrieval with a hand shovel. He calculated optimal depth based on detection risk versus recovery speed. I felt the recognition settle like weight in my chest. Elio had approached murder like I'd approached bridge construction for 30 years. Identify objective, assess constraints, optimize timeline, minimize risk, execute with precision. The forged notary seal, researched and replicated. The cemetery burial depth measured and calibrated. The insurance policy timing calculated down to the month. He'd become a perfect student of the wrong subject. He's using my own methods against me. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Every decision point optimized. Philip's weathered face showed concern. What does that mean for stopping him? It means I need to out-engineer the engineer. I looked at both men, ally and enemy, turned temporary partners. Use his assumptions against him. He's built a plan that accounts for emotional reaction, not strategic response. I taught Elio to measure twice, cut once, to plan thoroughly before executing. I never imagined he'd apply that lesson to planning his parents' deaths, with the same care I'd taught him to apply to everything else. But that's what happens when you raise someone to think systematically they apply the system to everything, even murder. We agreed on roles standing in that parking lot, while Gulf breezes carried salt air inland. Philip would document finding the cemetery box tomorrow morning during routine maintenance, creating an official paper trail. Leland would keep surveillance photos and videos as backup evidence. I would handle legal strategy. I'll report finding the box tomorrow, Philip said, shaking my hand with calloused grip. Say I was checking irrigation near Miss Hewitt's grave, found disturbed earth. Leland pulled his phone from his pocket. I'll keep the photos, all of them March poisoning through yesterday's burial, just in case. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling someone who can help us do this legally. I said, though, I hadn't yet figured out who that someone would be. We need recorded confession, not compromised evidence. We shook hands, strange alliance of enemy, friend, and stranger, united by need for justice that wouldn't destroy itself. I watched Philip lock the cemetery gate, heard the chain rattle as he secured it. Leland's headlights swept across my face as he pulled away, heading south. I drove north toward Pelican Bay alone again, with thoughts that felt too heavy for the small space of my car. At a red light on Tamiami Trail, I pulled out my phone and opened Leland's photos, the ones he'd texted me of the forged will. Dashboard light illuminated the screen as I studied the document structure. 4 pages, professional formatting, perfect signature forgery. But one detail stood out. The will only became legally valid after my death. Elio needed his father dead before he could execute the document. The timeline crystallized in my mind: kill Vernon, present will to probate court, collect $9 million within 30 days before anyone questioned authenticity. Hamish's name appeared nowhere on the will. His own brother had made him expendable. But Hamish had known that note with the insurance adjuster's number proved it. He'd seen this coming, documented what he could, protected himself against betrayal by the person he was helping commit murder. The will requires my death, I said aloud to the empty car. That's the linchpin of his entire plan. I pulled into my driveway at 1:25 a.m. and sat with the engine off, processing everything. Warm Florida night pressed against the windows. Porch light moths circled their futile orbits. Inside, Martha's chair sat empty in the living room, her reading glasses still on the side table where she'd left them 10 days ago. My engineer mind built the decision tree automatically. Option A, go to police now with compromised evidence. Result, inadmissible in court case. Dismissed sons, alerted and dangerous, rejected. Option B, confront sons directly without preparation. Result, no witnesses, no recording their word against mine, rejected. Option C, create controlled environment where sons confess on record with law enforcement involved from the start. Result, legally obtained confession admissible evidence case that survives court challenge. Optimal. I needed them to say it out loud, in their own voices, on record, which meant I needed to make them feel safe enough to confess, and I needed a sheriff listening when they did. In engineering, every problem has a solution if you understand the variables well enough. My son was the problem. The variables were his assumptions about me, his confidence in his plan, his belief that I'd react emotionally rather than strategically, and I knew exactly where his calculations were weak. He assumed grief would make me stupid. You don't fight a calculated plan with emotion, I whispered to the dark dashboard. You fight it with better calculation. I sat there designing the trap for 20 minutes, working through every angle. Elio had planned this like an engineering project, methodical, optimized, thorough. But engineers make one consistent mistake: they assume everyone else thinks like an engineer. My son had spent months building a perfect plan based on the assumption that I'd react emotionally irrationally like any other grieving father discovering his wife had been murdered. He'd forgotten I was the one who taught him how to plan in the first place. How do you build a legal case when every piece of evidence you have was obtained by breaking the law yourself? I entered the kitchen at 2 a.m., set my phone on the table where Martha used to do crossword puzzles. The house felt too quiet, too full of her absence. I made coffee more from habit than desire, something to do with my hands while my mind worked through problems with no clean solutions. The photos glowed on my screen as I scrolled. Leland's documentation, the aluminum box. The glass vials, the forged will, Hamish's hidden note. Everything photographed, cataloged, preserved digitally. But the metal box itself sat back at the cemetery reburied. Only photos remained. And photos wouldn't hold up without the original evidence legally obtained. 3 men illegally dug up a grave, I said to the empty kitchen. Everything we found is fruit of poisoned tree. I knew it existed. I knew where it was. The question was how to get it legally, how to transform illegal knowledge into admissible evidence. Martha. I need you to tell me I'm not crazy, I said to her empty chair. The chair didn't answer. The coffee tasted like burnt regret. I pulled out a notepad, my engineer's problem-solving method, drew a line down the center, left column contamination points, right column legal alternatives. 1 no warrant for cemetery search, 2-3 civilians not law enforcement, 3 evidence removed then replaced, 4 no official documentation, 5 participants would face grave desecration charges. Any defense attorney would shred this in court. My sons would walk free while I faced criminal charges for violating my wife's grave. Inadmissible evidence, I wrote. Illegal search, compromised chain of custody. If I went to police now with these photos, I'd be admitting to grave robbery. Elio's lawyer would argue the box was planted photos fabricated, entire case tainted. They'd walk. I'd be destroyed. Legal reality was crushing hope. The kitchen clock ticked toward 3 a.m., the hour when every worry feels heavier, every fear more real, every plan more fragile than daylight will prove it to be. I sat in that darkness with cold coffee and contaminated evidence, trying to engineer a solution built on quicksand. But engineering teaches you to work with constraints. The metal box evidence was contaminated, but verbal confession would be clean if obtained legally. Florida law allows one-party consent for recording conversations. I could record any conversation I participated in without the other party knowing. The right column finally had an entry, verbal confession, legally recorded. But sons don't confess to their fathers, not sons who'd spent months planning matricide with construction project precision. They'd only confess if they thought I didn't know, couldn't prove anything was safely under their control. They'll only confess if they think I'm helpless, I wrote, grieving, trusting, the father they expect. Which meant I had to pretend I didn't know, had to be broken confused asking innocent questions about insurance and estates, had to give them the target they'd been aiming at, the vulnerable widower who'd believe his son's helpful voices. I had to become bait in my own trap. At 5 a.m., the full structure crystallized. Call son's home under false pretense, estate discussion, insurance, questions something normal. Record the conversation legally via my phone. Involve Sheriff Otis for backup outside, ready to enter on signal. Get both sons in the same room. Let Elio feel confident, watch Hamish crack under pressure. The metal box evidence became backup, not primary. Confession was the goal. Trap requires, I wrote numbering points. 1 false sense of safety, 2 legal recording, 3 law enforcement standby, 4 controlled environment. I invite them to dinner, play the confused widower struggling with paperwork and grief. Let them think they're still executing their plan, still safe, still smarter than their grieving father. When they feel comfortable enough to speak freely, that's when I spring it. Have you ever had to choose between what's legal and what's right? Knowing that choosing wrong means the guilty walk free while the innocent stay punished. I sat at that table designing a trap for my own children because the alternative was letting them murder me to collect their blood money and live free. Legal versus right had stopped being an abstract question around midnight. First light crept through the kitchen window at 6 a.m. The notepad held 4 hours of analysis, flowcharts, decision trees, timeline calculations, risk assessments. Everything an engineer needed to build a structure that wouldn't collapse. Meet Sheriff Otis by 9 a.m., explain the situation, get legal framework in place. Call sons by noon, set the trap for Friday evening. 48 hours to prepare. Enough time to make it convincing, not enough to raise suspicion. I stood stretched muscles, motionless too long, felt my back protest. The hours bent over the notepad. Looked at Martha's empty chair across the table. I'm going to get them to confess, I said to her chair. On record, legally, the way you'd want it done. Not revenge, justice. There's a difference, and you taught me to know it. I gathered the notepad, the phone with its photos, the cold coffee cup. Walked to the sink, poured the last cup down. The drain watched the brown liquid spiral away. 2 days, I said aloud. Friday night. I'll have our boys home for dinner one last time. Asking your oldest friend to help you trap your own children is the kind of request that changes a friendship forever, no matter how it ends. I walked into the Collier County Sheriff's Office at 8:30 a.m., looking 10 years older than the man who'd buried his wife 3 days ago. 2 hours of sleep in 72 hadn't been kind. Sheriff Otis Dalton looked up from paperwork, saw my face hollow-eyed, aged overnight, and I watched recognition cross his features. This wasn't a social visit. Otis Dalton, 62, leaned back in his office chair, 20 years. My friend, a lawman who knew the difference between justice and revenge. He closed his office door without asking, poured 2 cups of coffee neither of us would drink, and sat across the desk waiting for me to speak. You look like hell, Vernon, he said quietly. What happened? I set Leland's phone on his desk. I need to tell you something about my sons, and I need your help setting a trap. Otis's expression didn't change, but his posture did. He leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. A trap for Elio and Hamish. Your boys start from the beginning. I started with the note under my door, the cafe meeting with Leland, the surveillance photos of my sons at Martha's grave, the midnight cemetery excavation, the aluminum box with poison vials and a forged will that gave Elio everything and Hamish nothing. The hidden note in Hamish's handwriting that proved he knew and feared his brother's betrayal. Otis studied each photo on the phone, with 30 years of law enforcement experience showing in his silence. He zoomed in on the forged will, examined the vials, read Hamish's note twice. Finally, he set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. It's this box you dug it up without a warrant, he said. Any lawyer destroys this in court. Illegal search, broken chain of custody, compromised evidence. Your sons walk and you face grave desecration charges. I know, I said. That's why I need them to confess on record. And you think they'll just tell you they murdered their mother? Otis asked, but his tone said he was already working through how to make it happen. They will if they think I'm helpless, confused. The grieving father they've been planning around. Otis had been best man at my wedding, godfather to Elio, coached Hamish's little league team for 3 summers. Now, I was asking him to hide in a patrol car while my sons potentially tried to kill me. The request sat between us like something physical heavy, with implications neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Florida one-party consent law. Otis said, finally shifting into professional mode. You can legally record any conversation you're part of without the other party's knowledge. We use it for undercover work all the time. He pulled out a notepad, started sketching. Open phone line. You keep your cell connected throughout the evening. We listen live from the station. I stage patrol cars within 100 meters, close enough to reach you in under 2 minutes if things go wrong. And if they confess on that line, admissible in court, clean evidence legally obtained. Otis looked up from his notes. We hear everything. You say the word, we come through that door. What word? Your choice. But make it something your sons won't question if you say it naturally. A memory, a phrase, something that fits the conversation. Otis leaned forward, friend not sheriff. Vernon, they killed their mother. If they're desperate enough, they'll kill you too. You understand what you're risking. 2 minutes response time. They could do a lot of damage in 2 minutes. That's exactly when they'll confess, I said. When they think they have to. When they're desperate and cornered and see no other way forward. You're the bait in your own trap. Otis shook his head. I hate this plan, but I'll make it work. Friday evening, staldest wise the wasposits ikoboiten. Like 7 p.m. I'll call them today, set it up. Vernon. Otis's voice carried the weight of 2 decades of friendship. If anything feels wrong, if they bring weapons, if Elio looks at you differently, if the situation deteriorates, you say that code word immediately. Promise me. I promise. At home, 9:45 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table and dialed Elio's number, rehearsed my confused widower voice in my head, let grief soften my edges. He answered on the 3rd ring. Dad, how are you holding up? Swisby. Endict Bauhorse. Immediate concern, perfectly pitched. I let my voice crack. The insurance company is asking about beneficiaries. There's so much paperwork and I'm confused by all of it. I need help. Dad, don't worry about anything. That's what Hamish and I are for. We'll handle it together. Professional warmth, calculated concern. The same tone he'd used when convincing us to increase the policy in March. Can you both come Friday evening? I need you here. I need my sons. Of course, whatever you need. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, I confirmed. Thank you, son. How do you speak to your child knowing every word is performance, every pause calculated, every emotion manufactured for an audience listening on an open phone line? I hung up and felt the weight of what I'd just done, invited my son to his own confession, baited the trap with my own vulnerability. 20 minutes later, I called Hamish. His voice came through completely different, higher-pitched, genuine worry, rapid questions. Dad, is everything okay? Are you safe? Do you need anything? Not performance, real concern, real fear. Just tired, son, missing your mother. I need you both here Friday. Dad, are you sure you're okay? You sound different. Of course, just overwhelmed by everything. Hamish's voice broke. Of course, Dad, I will be there, I promise. I hung up and sat in Martha's kitchen chair, listening to the silence that would last until Friday at 7 p.m. 10 hours from now, my sons would walk through that front door, expecting a confused, grieving father who needed their help. Instead, they'd find a trap I'd spent 3 sleepless nights designing. Otis's patrol cars would be staging a block away. The phone line would be open, and I'd have exactly 1 chance to get them to confess before they realized what I'd become. How do you set a trap in the same room where you taught your children to tie their shoes, knowing the next time you see that room, it will be a crime scene? The 10 hours between Hamish's phone call and 7 p.m. passed in a strange suspension of normal time. I staged the confrontation with the same methodical precision I'd once used to design bridges. Every element, measured every sightline, calculated every variable accounted for, except the one that mattered most, whether I could actually do this to my own children. At 2 p.m., I arranged the coffee table, placed Leland's phone with its damning photographs under Martha's favorite tablecloth, the white linen one she'd ironed every Sunday for 30 years, tested sight lines from the dining table. If I stood there, walked 3 paces, lifted the cloth, both sons would see the screen simultaneously. No escape, no time to prepare a lie. My phone sat in my jacket pocket, already connected to the number Otis had given me. I tested it. Otis, can you hear me? His voice came through tinny but clear. Crystal clear. We'll be listening from 6:45 on. Patrol cars will stage 2 blocks away at 6:30. Understood. Every detail planned like an engineering blueprint, but this structure was designed to collapse. Bank records, transfer receipts, mortgage documents showing I'd given everything to try to save Reginald Madden's failing company. Proof that Leland's 40-year story was built on lies his father had believed. I didn't consciously plan to use them tonight, didn't know why I was pulling them from storage, but some instinct engineer's intuition or Martha's posthumous guidance told me they should be near. You kept this for 40 years, I said to the chest. Tonight I find out why. I placed the file folder in my jacket's inside pocket, felt its weight reassuring against my ribs. Whether I'd need it, I couldn't say. But Martha had always known what to save. I was setting a trap in the living room, where Elio took his first steps, where Hamish learned to read, where Martha and I had danced on our 25th anniversary. Turning our home into an interrogation room. The coffee table had hosted Christmas mornings and birthday cakes and homework sessions. Now it would host the destruction of my family. At 6 p.m., I ordered Italian food from Bella Napoli, Martha's favorite, the restaurant where we'd celebrated 30 anniversaries. The woman on the phone recognized my voice. The usual anniversary order, Mr. Hewitt. I'll be... For 3, I said, and heard my voice crack naturally. I wasn't even acting yet. I set the dining table with Martha's good china, the set we'd received as a wedding gift. 3 place settings. White napkins folded the way she'd taught me. Everything arranged to look like a widower, trying to maintain normalcy while falling apart. In my jacket pocket, I rehearsed my confused widower voice. Boys, I'm so confused by all this paperwork. Can you help me understand? I sat in Martha's chair at 6:45 phone line, open in my pocket, and spoke to the empty room. Forgive me for what I'm about to do in our home. Precisely at 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to both sons. Elio wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, probably cost more than my first car. Hamish had on business casual, his shirt wrinkled like he'd driven straight from Orlando without stopping. Each carried white lilies, Martha's favorite flowers. Dad, Elio said, pulling me into a hug that lasted 3 beats longer than usual. Professional warmth perfectly calibrated. You look exhausted. Are you eating, sleeping, it may be 6 in hours? Hamish's hug trembled. His hands shook against my back. We brought Mom's flowers, Hamish said quietly. Where should I put them? I used my weak voice, the one I'd been practicing. Just set them by her chair. That's where she'd want them. They entered like they'd entered 1,000 times before filling the house with false concern. Asked about my sleep, my appetite, whether neighbors were helping. I answered vaguely, led them to the dining table, served the Italian food, with hands that trembled genuinely. Dinner unfolded with terrible ordinary rhythm. Elio talked about Tampa Bay weather, Miami business climate, how the market was recovering. His voice carried easy confidence, the tone of someone in complete control. He ate steadily, discussed wine pairings, remembered details about Martha's cooking with perfect filial affection. Hamish pushed pasta around his plate. 3 bites maybe? His hands kept moving from table to lap and back, never settling. Eyes darting between me and Elio like he was watching a tennis match where one of the players had a gun. At this lasagna, Elio said, gesturing with his fork. Remember how Mom used to make this for Sunday dinners? She'd spend all morning in the kitchen. I'm not very hungry, Hamish said quietly. I participated enough to seem present, agreed about the weather, nodded about business, mentioned how empty the house felt. The phone in my pocket transmitted everything to Otis 2 blocks away. Elio was performing grieving son perfectly. Hamish could barely hold his fork steady. In engineering, the most dangerous structures are the ones that look stable until the exact moment they collapse, no warning, no gradual failure, just sudden catastrophic loss. Our family dinner looked stable from the outside. 3 men eating Italian food, discussing ordinary things, occupying the same space we'd occupied hundreds of times before. But I could feel the structural cracks spreading beneath the surface, invisible stress fractures about to become catastrophic. 22 minutes of ordinary conversation. Then I set down my wine glass, the signal Otis and I had agreed on, meaning beginning confrontation now. Stood slowly, carefully, like an exhausted old man gathering strength. Elio's eyes tracked me with calculation. Hamish went pale. Before we discuss estate matters, I said, moving toward the coffee table, there's something I need to show you both. Of course, Dad, Elio said carefully. Whatever you need. Dad, please, Hamish whispered. My fingers gripped the tablecloth corner, Martha's favorite, the one she'd ironed every Sunday for 30 years. Beneath it lay Leland's phone with photographs that would destroy my son's lives. Elio watched me with calculation in his eyes, already running scenarios. Hamish had stopped breathing, and somewhere, 2 blocks away, Otis Dalton listened through an open phone line, hand probably resting on his car door handle, ready to move the moment I gave the signal. The moment your children see proof you know their secret, their faces reveal who they really are, and sometimes the revelation destroys you more than the secret did. I pulled the tablecloth completely away. The white linen slid across polished wood with a whisper pooling at my feet. Leland's phone sat exposed on the coffee table screen, glowing with the first photograph, Elio and Hamish at Martha's grave, timestamp visible in the corner, November 13th, 3:47 p.m. Both sons stared at the image of themselves, 2 days ago, caught. I said nothing. Let the evidence speak. In my jacket pocket, the phone transmitted everything to Otis, listening 2 blocks away. These were taken Wednesday afternoon, I said quietly. After the funeral. Elio's eyes moved from the screen to my face. 4 seconds of visible calculation passed across his features. Not panic, not guilt. Calculation. Dad, his voice stayed level. Where did you get these? Not that's not us. Not I can explain. Not you're mistaken. Where did you get those? The question of a man who knows exactly what the photos show, immediately running damage control. Not a son's response to false accusation. An engineer's response to a data problem. Assess damage, identify source, contain exposure. I recognized the mindset because I'd taught it to him. Elio leaned forward, studying the phone without touching it. His professional warmth, the concerned son who'd hugged me at the door, who'd asked about my sleep and appetite, tightened into something harder, sharper. The mask didn't shatter it, just adjusted, became more efficient, less decorative. Who took these? He asked. Who's been watching us? Someone who wanted me to know what you did while I grieved alone. Elio's jaw worked. I watched the calculation continue behind his eyes. Surveillance means witness means liability. Liability requires strategy. Not denying the cemetery visit, not explaining it away. Just running scenarios about exposure risk. Yet this complicates things, he said more to himself than to me. 3 words that confirmed everything. This complicates things. Not this is a misunderstanding. Not let me explain what we were doing. This complicates things, the statement of someone whose plan has encountered an unexpected variable. Hamish stood abruptly. His chair scraped backward, teetered, crashed to the floor. He went completely pale, trembling, tears already starting. His hands went to his face, breath coming in gasps that sounded like drowning. Not calculating like Elio, collapsing. Watching your child break down in tears is devastating, until you realize they're crying, because they finally understand they've been someone else's pawn all along, not because they regret what they've done. Hamish wasn't crying from guilt. He was crying from recognition that he'd been used. "Oh, God!" Hamish gasped through his hands. "Oh, God, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I kept my voice steady. "Sorry for what, Hamish? Tell me what you're sorry for." "I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want any of this." The words tumbled out between sobs. I tried to stop it, but he said people would die if I didn't cooperate, and I was scared, and Who said people would die? I asked, though I thought I knew. Hamish's next words stopped my breath. The neighbor, Leland. He came to us months ago. Said he knew about my gambling debts, knew about everything. He provided the whole plan, the substance, the timeline, everything. I stared at my younger son, crying into his hands. "Leland told you to poison your mother. He said it was revenge against you for what you did to his father in 1985. He said he'd been planning it for decades, threatened our families if we refused." Hamish looked up, face streaked with tears. "Elio tried to protect us, but Leland had too much leverage. We were trapped." Understanding crystallized like ice spreading across glass. I looked from crying Hamish to calculating Elio. Saw it clearly now. Elio had told Hamish that Leland was the mastermind, that the brothers were victims forced to participate under threat. That cooperation was the only way to protect their families from a vengeful neighbor nursing a 40-year grudge. Hamish believed it, still believed it, because his brother had told him, and brothers don't lie about things like that. Victim manipulated by perpetrator, layers of lies within the conspiracy. Elio had taken Leland's real 40-year vendetta, which I knew from our cafe conversation, which Hamish knew nothing about, and weaponized it. Made himself look like a protective older brother, trying to shield the family from an obsessed madman. Made Hamish complicit while making him feel powerless. Brilliant and sick. And you believed Leland masterminded this, I said slowly. Because Elio told me, Hamish said like it was obvious. He showed me the evidence. The 1985 files, the grudge, the surveillance photos Leland had collected. All the proof that Leland was Shah, Estadindas Pikazanin Wapi. He stopped, looked at Elio, really looked at him for the first time since the photos appeared. Elio sat perfectly still, watching both of us with those calculating eyes. Not defending himself, not confirming or denying Hamish's story. Just watching the pieces move on a board only he could see. Have you ever watched someone you love believe a lie so completely that telling them the truth feels crueler than letting them stay deceived? Hamish had spent months thinking he was protecting his family from a vengeful neighbor, when really he was helping his brother commit matricide. The truth would shatter him. But he was starting to see it anyway. Elio stood slowly, walked to the front door with deliberate, unhurried steps. Hamish stopped crying mid-sob, watching. I watched too, every muscle tensing. This conversation needs privacy, Elio said. The door stays unlocked, Elio, I said. He turned the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed through the living room. No, Dad, Elio said, turning back to face us. It doesn't, not anymore. The professional warmth was completely gone. What remained was cold calculation, an engineer assessing a failed structure and deciding whether to repair or demolish. The deadbolt clicked into place, and Elio turned to face us. Hands relaxed at his sides, expression completely transformed from grieving son to something I'd never seen before. Hamish stopped crying mid-sob, finally understanding too late which brother had been lying all along. In my pocket, my phone transmitted everything to Otis 2 blocks away, but 2 blocks might as well be 2 miles if my son decided the next 60 seconds required eliminating witnesses. The most terrifying version of your child is the one who sounds exactly like you, using your words, your logic, your methodology, to explain why they had to kill. Elio walked to the center of the living room with the calm precision I'd seen him use on construction sites. Not angry, not defensive, assessing. You taught me something when I was 12, Dad, he said, voice steady as a plumb line. Remember that bridge project in Tampa? The one where the client wanted to cut corners on the foundation? I didn't answer. Hamish had gone completely still beside me. You said engineering isn't about building things. It's about solving problems. And every problem has the same 4 steps. Elio held up one finger. Identify the actual problem, not the symptoms. My throat went dry. The problem wasn't that Martha existed. Elio continued, second finger rising. The problem was the estate distribution. $9 million split 3 ways instead of 2. That's $3 million per person versus $4.5 million. At Jesus Christ, I whispered. Step 2, assess available resources. Third finger. Martha's health record showed early-stage heart arrhythmia. Hamish's pharmacy access. My metallurgy knowledge from the firm. Your complete trust in both of us. Hamish made a sound like a wounded animal. He was using my exact framework, the methodology I'd taught him for decades. Identify, assess, optimize, execute. Step 4. Stop! Hamish choked out, standing so fast his chair toppled backward. Stop, stop, stop! You said you told me Leland was the one planning it. You said he had evidence about Dad's loan to Reginald, that he'd destroy our family unless we helped him get revenge. Elio turned to his brother with something that might have been pity. And you believe me because you're not an engineer, Hamish. You're a pharmacist. You follow protocols someone else designed. The pattern interrupt hit me like a fist. How many times had I praised Elio's analytical mind while telling Hamish he was better with people than problems? How many times had I built up one son while diminishing the other? I showed you fake emails, Elio said. Photoshop screenshots of Leland's demands. You never questioned them because they confirmed what you already feared, that Dad's past would destroy us. Hamish's knees buckled. He caught himself on the bookshelf, Martha's photo collection rattling. No, you said the vials, the timing. You said Leland planned everything. I planned everything. Elio's voice never rose. Leland was reconnaissance. I needed to know if there were any witnesses to the 1985 mortgage, any documentation that could surface later. You approached him, I managed. Elio smiled, thin professional. 18 months ago, I was researching family history for Martha's birthday. Asked if he remembered the old neighborhood. He spent 3 hours telling me about Dad's betrayal, Reginald's suicide, his 40-year grudge. Perfect foundation for a scapegoat. The engineering term landed like a blade. In structural design, scapegoats are intentional weak points, components designed to fail, first protecting the main structure. By the time we were arrested, Elio continued. The narrative would be clear. Obsessed neighbor manipulates grieving sons into helping him get revenge. Hamish provides materials under duress. I'm the reluctant accomplice. Leland's the mastermind. Pause here, if you haven't already hit that comment button below, because what Vernon discovers in the next 60 seconds will shatter everything he thought he knew about the man he called his neighbor for 11 years. Drop a comment with your theory about who's behind that bedroom door, and remember, nothing in this story is exactly what it seems. Now, back to Vernon's worst nightmare. Except Leland doesn't know anything. I said pieces clicking into place with the horrible precision of a well-designed mechanism. Leland knows he hated you for 40 years. Elio corrected. He knows he moved here to keep an eye on you. He told me that himself thought we were bonding, but he never acted on it, never sent threats, never contacted us, never did anything except watch and resent. Until you gave him the opportunity. Until I documented the opportunity. Elio pulled his phone from his pocket. 14 months of text messages asking about Dad's betrayal. 6 months of emails discussing justice for Reginald. 3 months of recorded phone calls where I lead the conversation and he agrees with increasingly violent hypotheticals. My second pattern interrupt came unbidden. I'd taught Elio to document everything, to build cases with evidence, create paper trails, establish chains of causation. I'd made him into this. None of it's real, Hamish whispered, sliding down the bookshelf to the floor. You made me think I killed her because I thought we had no choice. You killed her because you're weak, Elio said, not unkindly. And predictable. I needed someone to handle the pharmaceutical component, and you needed to believe you were protecting family. It was elegant resource allocation. Where is Leland now? I asked, though I was starting to understand. Guest bedroom, Elio said. Has been since about 2 p.m. I told him you'd found documentation about Reginald and wanted to apologize privately. He came right over. In the folder. The 1985 documents I'd unconsciously retrieved from the garage left on the entry table. Elio had seen them when he arrived. What did you do to him? Mild sedative in his coffee? Nothing permanent? Just enough to keep him quiet until Sheriff Dalton arrives and finds us all together. The vengeful neighbor, the manipulated sons, the grieving father who uncovered the terrible truth. Except I'd already uncovered it, and Otis had heard everything through the phone line still connected in my pocket. The guest bedroom door began to open. Leland Madden stood in the doorway, but he wasn't sedated. His eyes were clear locked on Elio, and in his hand was my smartphone, the one I deliberately left on the nightstand, at 6:45 p.m. video recording, pointed at the living room. Got every word, Leland said quietly. Every single word. Leland Madden stood in the doorway holding my smartphone, but it wasn't triumph in his eyes. It was exhaustion. Blood crusted his left temple. Zip tie marks carved purple rings around both wrists. The guest bedroom behind him showed an overturned ladder-back chair, duct tape strips on the hardwood, a toppled lamp. How long were you restrained? I asked. Since 2:15. Leland's voice came out hoarse. Worked my hands free about 20 minutes ago. Found your phone on the nightstand, saw it was recording. Elio hadn't moved from his position near the bookshelf. Doesn't matter. He's still the perfect scapegoat. I invited him here. Elio continued, voice steady as rebar. Told him I'd found documentation proving Dad stole from his father. He came because 40 years of hate makes people predictable. When this is over, every thread leads back to him, the obsessed neighbor who manipulated grieving sons into murder. You made him the villain in a story he didn't even write, I said. Elio pulled a laptop from the guest bedroom desk, opened it with practiced efficiency. The screen showed a professional notary in business attire waiting. We're going to finish what we started, Dad. You're going to sign a new will. This one leaves everything to me, $9 million, the house, all of it. The notary thinks this is legitimate estate planning. He set the laptop on the bed, placed a document beside it. My name pre-printed at the bottom, signature line, blank. Or I call Sheriff Dalton right now. Elio said, And tell him Leland attacked you, that I found him trying to force your signature, your choice. Hamish stood frozen in the corner, face white. Let me get my pen, I said. I reached into my jacket's inner pocket. My fingers found the small cardboard box I'd carried from the office that morning, unconscious habit, the way engineers keep records close. How many times had I carried that box past my desk, sliding it into my pocket like I was saving a piece of history I might need. Engineering taught me to keep records. Life taught me those records could become weapons. I withdrew the box instead of a pen. I didn't come here to sign your forgery, I said, opening it. I came to show Leland what his father knew, what Reginald Madden knew when he died. More paper lies won't save you, Elio said. I spread the documents across the guest bed. Yellowed pages, 40 years in storage. Bank transfer record, mortgage paperwork, creditor receipts. All dated March 1985. These aren't lies. These are bank records from March 1985. $100,000. Every cent I had mortgaged against this house transferred to Madden Construction's creditors. Leland stepped closer, his phone still in his hand. What? Your father's company was failing, I said. The Miami project collapsed. I gave him everything I had to keep the creditors from forcing bankruptcy. It wasn't enough to save the company, but it bought him time to close operations with dignity. I found the creditor receipt pointed to the signature line. Look at this, Leland, the received by line. Leland's hands shook as he took the document. His voice came out barely audible. That's his signature. March 18th, 1985, 2 weeks before the heart attack. The paper trembled between his fingers. Tears tracked through the dust on his cheeks. 40 years, Leland whispered. I spent 40 years believing you destroyed him. And he knew you tried. Watching Leland's face collapse felt like watching a building implode, all that rage supporting 40 years of structure. And when the foundation crumbled, everything came down at once. I'd wanted vindication. I hadn't wanted to see a man's life's work reduced to grief. This changes nothing, Elio said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The cemetery evidence still exists. Hamish still confessed. I still control the narrative. No. Hamish moved for the first time, pulling a pocket knife from his jeans. You don't. He knelt beside Leland, began sawing through the remaining zip tie fragments around his ankles. The plastic snapped with small pops. Elio backed toward the doorway, hand sliding into his pocket. When he pulled out his phone, I saw the screen was already lit. Put the phone down, Elio, I said. He turned it toward me. The screen showed a single contact, Sheriff Otis Dalton, but the call status read, Active 4723. Ice flooded my veins. You think I'm trapped? Elio's smile returned thin and professional. I've been performing for an audience, Dad. Every confession, every admission, all on record, all inadmissible because I never consented to recording. His finger hovered over the end call button. He looked at each of us, Leland with his freed ankles, Hamish with his pocket knife, me with my 40-year-old documents. You taught me to identify problems and engineer solutions, Elio said. I solved Martha, and I just solved you. His thumb moved toward the red button. Elio took 3 steps toward me before Hamish's voice cut through the room like a blade. The phone's not your only problem. Elio froze mid-stride. What? Every threat, every manipulation, every confession. I documented my consent in writing at month 3, renewed it quarterly. That recording is admissible. The color drained from Elio's face. You wouldn't. I'm your brother. You stopped being my brother when you made me bury evidence in a cemetery. Hamish's hands didn't shake. The pharmaceutical precision I'd seen him use measuring compounds had shifted to something harder: documentation, evidence, proof. A year of being told he was weak, predictable, a tool to be used. And he'd recorded every second. You're lying, Elio said, but his voice had lost its engineering certainty. Show me the consent documentation. Hamish swiped his phone screen. A scanned document appeared, notarized letter, dated February 2024. Hamish's signature declaring his intention to record all conversations with family members for personal safety. Renewed in May, August, November. Florida Statute 934.03, Hamish said. One-party consent with documented justification for personal protection. Every lawyer I consulted said it's admissible. Elio's calculated demeanor shattered like tempered glass under a sledgehammer. Give me that phone, now. He lunged forward, hand outstretched. I stepped into his path. "It's over, Elio." He shoved me backward. My shoulder hit the doorframe hard enough to send pain radiating down my arm. Leland shouted something. Hamish backed into the corner, phone clutched against his chest. "Nay, nothing's over until I say it's over." Elio snarled and the professional mask was completely gone. This was raw desperation, the engineer who'd optimized every variable suddenly facing a problem he couldn't solve. He advanced again. Not toward Hamish now, toward me. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the same methodology he'd used planning Martha's murder. Identify the problem, Vernon blocking access. Assess resources, superior strength, desperation. Optimize timeline, eliminate obstacle now. Execute. His fist came up. Leland Madden rose from the chair where he'd been sitting, with freed ankles crossed the room in 3 strides and used his full body weight to tackle Elio sideways. They crashed into the hallway with enough force to rattle picture frames. The guest bedroom lamp shattered. Leland's voice came out hoarse but steady. 40 years of hating the wrong man. I'm not watching you hurt another. Get off me! Elio writhed beneath him, elbow catching Leland's jaw. Leland don't, I started, but they were already grappling. Watching Elio's control shatter was like watching a dam fail everything he'd held back for months, flooding out in 3 seconds of violence. The careful engineer replaced by something feral, desperate, cornered. They rolled across the hardwood. Elio's knee found Leland's ribs. Leland's fist connected with Elio's mouth. I heard the wet crack of splitting skin. Blood appeared on Elio's lip, dark and sudden. Stop! Both of you, stop! I grabbed Leland's shoulder, tried to pull them apart. Hamish pressed himself into the corner phone screen, still glowing. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth. My own blood pressure pounding in my ears almost drowned out Hamish's voice. Dad, someone's outside. Multiple cars. I froze, listened. Engine sounds. More than one. Tires on gravel. Radio static crackling through night air. Elio and Leland went still, both breathing hard. Then pounding on the front door. Heavy, authoritative, unmistakable. That sheriff's department opened the door. Sheriff Otis Dalton's voice carried through the wood, with the weight of 40 years in law enforcement. The 4 of us stayed frozen me, standing over Elio and Leland on the floor. Hamish backed against the wall, time crystallizing around us like amber. As this is private property, Elio started. The front door crashed inward. The deadbolt I'd watched Elio lock in. Task 4.2 tore through the frame in a shower of splinters. 4 tactical flashlights flooded the hallway, turning everything stark white and shadow black. I'd spent 64 years building structures that could withstand pressure. I'd never learned how to hold a family together when it wanted to tear itself apart. Hands where I can see them, all of you. Sheriff Otis Dalton stepped through the splintered doorway, service weapon drawn, but pointed at the floor. Behind him, 3 deputies in tactical gear fanned into formation. I raised my hands slowly. Leland did the same, rolling off Elio and onto his knees. Hamish's hands went up, phone still clutched in his right palm. Elio remained on the floor, blood streaming from his split lip, but his hands rose with calculated compliance. Otis took in the scene with one sweeping glance, overturned furniture, shattered lamp, 4 men in various stages of violence and exhaustion. His expression never changed. Vernon Hewitt, he said, eyes locking on mine. Relief flooded through me. He'd heard everything. 47 minutes of Elio's confession, Hamish's year-long recording. It was over. Yes, Sheriff, I said. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. The words didn't make sense. I stood there with my hands raised, blood from Leland's temple on my sleeve, Elio's confession still echoing in my memory, and tried to process what I'd just heard. What? Turn around, Otis said, voice flat. Hands behind your back. One of the deputies moved forward with handcuffs. The metal felt cold against my wrists. The ratcheting sound of the locks engaging seemed impossibly loud. 4 tactical flashlights pinned us in place, me against the wall in handcuffs. Elio on his knees with blood streaming from his split lip. Leland crouched mid-lunge, Hamish clutching his phone like a lifeline. Otis looked at me with something that might have been regret or might have been duty. I couldn't tell which. You have the right to remain silent, he began. You have the right to remain silent, Otis said, and I waited for the rest of the Miranda warning, with my wrists locked behind my back. Instead, he pulled a handcuff key from his belt. But that was to secure the scene, Vernon. Deputies, release him. The metal clicked open. Blood rushed back into my hands. I turned to face Otis, confused. At the handcuffs I actually need, Otis continued pulling a second pair from his belt, are for your son. He crossed the hallway in 3 steps and locked them around Elio's wrists before my son could finish the protest forming on his bloodied lips. Elio Hewitt, you're under arrest for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Elio's face went completely blank, not shocked, calculated, processing variables. Everyone stay exactly where you are, Otis said to the rest of us. Hands visible. The 3 deputies fanned out with practiced efficiency. 1 positioned near Leland in the corner, 1 near Hamish by the bedroom door, 1 blocking the splintered entrance. Tactical flashlights painted harsh shadows across broken furniture and shattered lamp glass. Sheriff, thank God you're here, Elio said, voice shifting to concern. My father and this man attacked me. You can see the blood. I was defending myself when... Save it, Elio. Otis's tone carried 40 years of hearing lies. I've been listening for 53 minutes. Elio's eyes snapped to Otis's phone, then swept the room, landed on my jacket pocket where my phone sat, with the call screen visible through the fabric's outline. Vernon called me at 7:02, Otis said. Left the line open, I heard everything. Your confession about planning Martha's murder, the engineering methodology, the scapegoat strategy, the forged will, all of it. Elio's voice came out quiet. You called him, not me. I met my son's eyes. You taught me to plan for contingencies, son. I learned from the best. The copper taste of adrenaline still coated my tongue. My shoulder throbbed where I'd hit the doorframe. But watching realization spread across Elio's face that his father had outmaneuvered him, using the exact planning principles he'd demonstrated, felt like swallowing broken glass. Victory and grief occupying the same breath. You have the right to an attorney. Otis continued, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Elio stayed silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then, that recording's inadmissible. Florida Statute 934.03 requires 2-party consent for wiretapping. I never consented to being recorded. Any prosecutor will have it thrown out before arraignment. His voice had returned to engineering precision, analyzing structural weaknesses, identifying failure points. The cemetery evidence is tainted, Elio continued. Broken chain of custody from the moment Dad removed it from the burial site. The video recording from Leland's property was obtained without warrant. You have nothing that will survive a motion to suppress. Otis finished the Miranda rights without acknowledging the legal argument. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them to you? I understand them perfectly, Elio said, and I understand you're arresting me based on inadmissible evidence. This won't hold. You're not under arrest for what I heard on the phone, Otis said calmly. Elio's calculated expression flickered. Then what exactly am I under arrest for, sheriffs? I spoke before Otis could answer. I know the recording might not hold up in court. I wasn't counting on it. Elio's eyes locked on mine. Then you have nothing. The cemetery box is inadmissible. You're bluffing. I'm not bluffing. I kept my voice steady, the same tone I'd used explaining structural engineering to clients for 40 years. I'm just not the one with the evidence you need to worry about. How many times had Elio prepared for every contingency, except the one where his victim fought back with the same calculated precision he'd taught me? He'd optimized for my grief, my trust, my blind spots. He'd never optimized for my capacity to learn. You're talking in circles, Elio said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. If the phone recording's inadmissible and the cemetery evidence is tainted, you have no case. Otis stood with arms crossed, watching the exchange with professional patience. One of the deputies had pulled out a notebook, documenting everything. The phone call served 2 purposes, I said. First, it gave Sheriff Dalton real-time awareness of a dangerous situation justifying immediate response. Second, it established timeline and context. But you're right, it probably won't be primary evidence at trial. Is that then what will be? Elio asked. I shifted my gaze from my son to Hamish, who still stood near the bedroom door with his phone clutched in both hands. The screen glowed in the tactical flashlight's harsh illumination. Otis followed my look, understanding passed between us without words. Hamish, I said quietly, show the sheriff what you've been carrying. Hamish wouldn't. Elio started, then stopped. The calculation returned to his face, running probabilities. He can't. Anything he recorded falls under the same statute. Two-party consent required. I can, Hamish said, voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. And I will. He stepped forward, moving past the deputy who nodded permission. His thumb swiped across the phone screen, navigating to the recording app we'd seen in Task 5.1. The display showed 367 days of audio files in chronological order, each one labeled with date, time, and location. March 2024 through November 2024. Every conversation, every threat, every manipulation preserved in digital format. Elio read the file names from across the hallway. I watched color drain from his face as he processed what he was seeing. March 15th, 2024, Kitchen 1847. March 22nd, 2024, Pharmacy Office 1423. April 3rd, 2024, Cemetery 2314. Hundreds of files, thousands of hours, a complete documentary record of his own confession, manipulation, and conspiracy. You can't, Elio whispered, but his voice carried no conviction, only recognition that the game had shifted beyond his control. Hamish's thumb hovered over the screen, ready to play the first file for Sheriff Otis. Hamish took 3 steps toward Sheriff Otis and said the words that ended my son's carefully constructed empire. I have written consent documentation for every recording. Elio's eyes narrowed. You're lying. I documented consent in writing, Hamish said, while voice steady. Initial agreement. March 2024, renewed quarterly with your signature. March 12th, June 15th, September 8th, November 7th. I never signed anything authorizing you to record me, Elio said. Hamish met his brother's gaze without flinching. You signed a privacy waiver for family therapy sessions. I labeled it differently. You never read past the header. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. I watched Elio's face as he processed what Hamish had just said, the realization spreading like cracks through ice. Family therapy. Elio repeated slowly. The grief counseling forms you sent me after Martha died. Page 4, Section 3, Hamish said. Consent to record all family interactions for therapeutic documentation purposes. Your signature's right there below the paragraph you skipped. Elio's jaw clenched. The engineering precision that had served him so well had failed at the most basic level. He'd trusted a document without verification. The same mistake he'd counted on Hamish making with his fake emails about Leland. Hamish walked forward past Elio without making eye contact and placed his phone in Sheriff Otis's outstretched hand. The physical act of crossing that invisible line from accomplice to witness seemed to drain tension from his shoulders. He stood straighter. 367 days, Hamish said. Everything's time-stamped and geotagged. Location services tracked every conversation to specific addresses. Otis took the phone expression neutral. You understand this makes you a witness in a criminal investigation. I understand, Hamish said. I'm ready to testify. The deputy with the notebook moved closer, documenting the evidence transfer. Otis navigated to a cloud storage folder, began scrolling through scanned documents. Consent forms dated March 12th, June 15th, September 8th, and November 7th. Otis said, reading aloud, all signed, legal language establishing permission to record conversations for family therapy and personal safety documentation. Those signatures were obtained under false pretenses, Elio said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Fraud vitiates consent. Any first-year law student knows that. Tell it to your lawyer, Otis replied. He tapped the screen comparing timestamps between consent documents and audio files. Deputy Morrison, verify the metadata. The deputy pulled out a tablet, began cross-referencing file properties. Timestamps align, sheriff. Consent documentation predates or coincides with recording dates. Chain of custody appears intact. Watching one son destroy another with nothing but a phone, and the truth felt like witnessing an execution, legal, necessary, and utterly devastating. The air in the hallway smelled like dust and broken wood from the splintered door. My mouth tasted like copper and regret. What exactly do these recordings contain? Otis asked Hamish. Hamish's voice remained steady, pharmacist-level precision. File 127, February 18th. Elio instructing me to bury the cemetery box at eternal rest. Exact GPS, coordinates 26.1420, north 81.7948 west. File 204, April 3rd, threatening to expose my gambling debts to Dad if I didn't comply with the insurance fraud scheme. I hadn't known about gambling debts. Another manipulation Elio had kept hidden, another pressure point he'd exploited. File 286, June 22nd. Hamish continued. Elio explaining how he'd forged the power of attorney documents using Dad's signature from the 1985 mortgage papers. He walked me through the entire scanning and digital overlay process. Otis looked up from the phone. How many files total? 367 recordings, 41 hours of audio. The number hit like a physical blow. 41 hours. Nearly 2 full days of documented conspiracy threat and manipulation. Every conversation Hamish had endured while I'd remained blind to what was happening under my own roof. Elio had built his conspiracy like a house of cards, each threat supporting the next, never realizing Hamish was documenting every placement, waiting for the moment to exhale and watch it all collapse. "You're lying," Elio said, but the word came out hollow. "You weren't smart enough to plan this. You're not capable of—" He stopped. The calculation drained from his face, replaced by something raw. "When," Elio's voice rose, "when did you start recording me, you pathetic s***or? Two deputies moved closer hands on his shoulders as he strained against the handcuffs. "The day you told me you'd ruin my life if I didn't help you," Hamish said quietly. "The very first conversation." Elio lunged forward despite the restraints. The deputies caught him, forced him back against the wall. His face had gone completely white except for the blood still crusted on his split lip. "You recorded me for a year," Elio said, voice cracking. "A year, while pretending to be my brother, while acting scared and weak and... I was scared," Hamish interrupted. "And you made me weak by design. But I wasn't stupid enough to believe you'd stop, so I documented everything." Elio stopped struggling against the deputy's grip. His eyes locked on Hamish with an expression I'd never seen on my son's face, naked fear replacing calculation. "You recorded everything," he whispered. Hamish nodded once. "Every word, every threat, every crime." The hallway went silent, except for radio static from the deputies' shoulder mics. Tactical flashlights painted harsh shadows across Elio's face, highlighting the moment his empire collapsed into documented evidence. Then Hamish looked at me, and his next words changed everything. "And Dad knew I was doing it from the beginning. I didn't know about the recordings until 3 days ago, when Hamish came to me terrified and shaking, but letting Elio believe I'd orchestrated everything from the beginning was the last gift I could give my younger son." "That's not true," Elio said, eyes snapping to mine. "You couldn't have—" "Hamish came to me 3 days ago," I said quietly. "He'd been recording for months, terrified and alone. I didn't orchestrate it, I just helped him see it through." Otis watched me with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 40 years separating truth from performance. "But you let Elio think you'd planned it from the start. My son needed to believe he'd been outsmarted, not betrayed by his victim," I said. "It was kinder that way." Elio's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: disbelief, recognition, something that looked almost like relief before hardening back to anger. "Deputy Fark," Otis said. "Take them to separate vehicles. Elio to Unit 1, Hamish to Unit 3. 2 deputies moved forward. One guided Elio toward the splintered front door with a hand on his elbow. The other approached Hamish, who still stood near the hallway, holding nothing, now that his phone was evidence. I followed them outside. November night air hit my face, cool and clean, after the closed-in tension of the hallway. 3 patrol cars sat in my driveway, with lights painting red and blue across the oak trees. The deputy opened the rear door of the first cruiser. "Watch your head." Elio ducked inside without looking at me. The door closed with a solid thunk. Through the window I could see him staring straight ahead, face illuminated in intervals by the light bar. Still calculating even now. Still running scenarios. Hamish stopped at the second cruiser's open door, turned to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry. We stood there for 3 seconds, father and son, co-conspirators, survivors. Everything that needed to be said packed into silence. "And Dad," Hamish said finally, "I'm sorry for all of it." "I know, son." My throat felt tight. "I know." He nodded once, then folded himself into the back seat. The deputy closed the door. Both cruisers pulled away down the driveway, taillights disappearing into darkness. 2 sons, 1 destroyed, 1 damaged. This is what winning looks like. Leland stood near the third patrol car with a deputy beside him. Blood had dried at his temple where Elio had struck him hours ago. His wrists still showed purple bruising from the zip ties. "Mr. Madden needs to come to the station for processing," Otis said, approaching us. "But he's a material witness, not a suspect. I'll need a formal statement tomorrow at 9 a.m. "I'll be there," Leland said. His voice came out hoarse, exhausted. "Vernon vouches for you," Otis continued. "And the evidence shows you were manipulated. You're free to go after we document your injuries and get your statement on record." Leland turned to me. In the patrol car's lights, his face looked a decade older than his 65 years. 40 years I blamed you. My father knew the truth, and I never asked." "We both carried the wrong story," I said. "At least now we know." He extended his hand. I shook at his grip firm despite the bruised wrists. 40 years of hate ending in a driveway handshake. Not forgiveness yet, just acknowledgement that we'd both been wrong. The third patrol car pulled away with Leland in the passenger seat. Otis stood beside me as the taillights faded. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll call you with updates." 64 years I'd spent building things, bridges, buildings, a family. In 3 days I'd dismantled what took decades to construct, and I still didn't know if the foundation could be salvaged. I walked back inside. The living room looked like a crime scene because that's exactly what it was. Overturned furniture. The 1985 documents still scattered across the guest bed. Hamish's phone charger plugged into the wall outlet connected to nothing. Broken lamp glass catching light from the hallway. I sat in Martha's chair, the wingback she'd loved, positioned near the window where she could watch birds at the feeder. The fabric still smelled faintly like her lavender hand lotion, even after 8 months. "Well, Martha," I said to the empty room, "it's done." The mantel held her photo beside our family portrait from 1998. 2 young boys grinning at the camera, their whole lives ahead of them. Elio, 14, already showing signs of the analytical mind that would become both gift and curse. Hamish, 9, softer, trusting. "You always said family was everything," I continued. "I saved what I could." The copper taste of adrenaline had finally faded, replaced by something bitter. Grief maybe, or just exhaustion. I don't know if that's enough. My phone rang at 10 p.m., Otis's name on the screen. "Vernon," he said without preamble. "Wanted to update you before you saw it on the news. Elio's being held without bail at county lockup. DA's charging conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, coercion, witness tampering, and they're reviewing the murder charge pending toxicology confirmation." I closed my eyes. What about Hamish? His cooperation and the duress evidence work in his favor. State attorney sees him as a victim who was coerced. He'll likely face probation, community service, maybe supervised release. He was a victim first. When does a father's protection become manipulation? When does justice become revenge? I'd defended my home and my honor, but at what cost to the sons I'd raised? "One more thing," Otis said. "The insurance company froze your claim pending the investigation. Standard procedure in fraud cases. Could take 6 months to a year to resolve. The financial security I'd fought for still uncertain. The battle not fully over." "I understand," I said. "Get some sleep, Vernon. Tomorrow starts the long part." The call ended. I sat in Martha's chair holding the family portrait, staring at 2 boys who didn't know what their futures held. For the first time since Elio had walked through my door, I let out the breath I'd been holding for 3 days. 3 houses down from mine, I knocked on Leland Madden's door at 7:30 a.m. with 2 cups of gas station coffee and 40 years of apologies I didn't know how to say. The morning after the arrests, I'd woken at 5 to an empty house that smelled like broken lamp oil and the ghost of Martha's lavender lotion. The 1985 documents were still scattered across the guest bedroom floor. I'd cleaned for an hour, then stopped when I realized I was just moving debris from one room to another. Leland's house sat 3 properties east on Pelican Bay Drive. Pale yellow stucco Gulf view porch, the same basic floor plan as mine, but mirrored. I'd lived 11 years within shouting distance and never once crossed the invisible property line that separated his vendetta from my ignorance. 11 years, 3 houses apart. Martha would have been ashamed. I knocked again, heard footsteps inside, then silence. Imagine Leland checking the peephole, seeing me deciding. The door opened. He stood in a bathrobe, bruises still visible along his left temple where Elio had struck him. The zip tie marks around his wrists had turned from purple to yellow-green. His eyes were clear, but tired. Gas station coffee, he said, looking at the cups in my hands. You really know how to apologize. I didn't know if you'd answer the door. Neither did I until I opened it. He took one of the cups, sipped, grimaced. Terrible. It's what I had. Leland stepped back, gestured to the porch. Might as well drink it somewhere with a view. We sat in wicker chairs overlooking the Gulf. November morning light painted the water gold and silver. A cleanup crew worked down the beach where storm debris had piled against the seawall. The coffee tasted like burnt plastic and regret, but I drank it anyway because walking away felt worse. He saved my life 2 nights ago. I thought watching him stare at the horizon. The least I owe him is terrible coffee and the truth. 40 years I blamed you, Leland said after a long silence. My father knew you tried to save him, and I never asked why he stopped talking about it. The mortgage documents, I said, his signature on the creditor receipt, March 18th, 1985. Leland's voice stayed flat factual. 2 weeks before the heart attack. He knew you'd given him everything, and he never told me. Maybe he was ashamed, I offered. Pride makes men do stupid things, keep stupid secrets. Like living 11 years as neighbors without knocking on a door. I looked at him. His face had no accusation in it, just observation. Yeah, I said, like that. Pride's expensive. Cheaper than revenge. Leland took another sip of terrible coffee. That cost me 4 decades. We sat in silence while the Gulf rolled in and out, constant as mathematics. A pelican dove offshore, came up empty, tried again. Persistence without strategy, the opposite of engineering, the opposite of everything I'd taught my sons. Reconciliation tastes like gas station coffee, bitter, lukewarm. Nothing you'd choose if better options existed, but somehow exactly what the moment requires. Sheriff Otis called me yesterday, Leland said. Wanted to verify some timeline details. Told me Elio approached me 18 months ago deliberately. Every conversation we had about your betrayal of my father, Elio, was building a case. He needed a scapegoat, I said. Someone with motive and grudge. You were perfect. I made it easy. 40 years of hate sitting right there ready to weaponize. Leland set his coffee cup on the porch railing. Your son saw me coming from a mile away. He saw everyone coming. That was his gift. And his curse. We finished the coffee as the sun climbed higher. When Leland walked me to his door, he extended his hand again. I shook it. 9 a.m. tomorrow, he said. I'm giving my statement at the sheriff's office. If you need me to testify about the 1985 documents, I will. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just telling the truth 40 years too late. I walked back to my house feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. The mathematical impossibility of grief. 6 days later, I sat across a polished conference table from Roland Ashford, my family attorney for 20 years. His office overlooked downtown Naples' 12th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space that charge by the square foot, and passed the cost to clients who could afford certainty. Roland Ashford had the weary patience of a man who'd guided 3 generations through estate planning, and now found himself navigating criminal defense. 62, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He'd drafted Martha's will, witnessed our power of attorney documents, sent us anniversary cards every February. Now he sat with a stack of legal filings 6 inches high. The DA's office confirmed all charges against Elio. Will proceed to trial, Roland said, reading from a summary sheet. Evidence is overwhelming. Hamish's recordings, your documentation, Sheriff Dalton's testimony, the cemetery box, contents. What's the timeline? Arraignment in 2 weeks, trial likely spring 2025, DA's pushing for March or April. He flipped a page. They're confident. Hamish's cooperation sealed it. What did Hamish get? Roland pulled a separate document. Conditional suspended sentence. 2 years probation, 500 hours community service, mandatory counseling. If he complies, no jail time. The duress evidence and victim status helped. Justice, I learned, is mostly paperwork and waiting forms. Filed hearings, scheduled outcomes, delivered in sterile conference rooms by attorneys who bill in 6-minute increments. Yes, Leland Madden's been cleared completely. Roland continued. Manipulated victim, no charges. And Elio's looking at 8 to 15 years based on the charges. Conspiracy, fraud, extortion, coercion. If they add the murder charge, they will, I said. Then 20 to life. Florida doesn't play with premeditated murder. I nodded. The words felt abstract. my son, 20 years, life, and the insurance claim I asked though I already knew. Denied. Roland slid a letter across the table. Official letterhead, legal language, final decision. The fraudulent filing and underlying criminal conspiracy void the policy. I'm sorry, Vernon, that money's gone. I picked up the denial letter, read it once, set it down. $4.2 million. Martha's future, the legacy I'd planned, gone. $9 million estate minus the lost insurance equals $4.8 million remaining. Enough to live on. Not enough to leave the legacy I'd planned. Martha's jewelry would never be recovered. Elio would never inherit anything. Hamish would spend years rebuilding what his brother destroyed. This was victory. The detention center waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and broken families, 20 plastic chairs bolted to linoleum, a buzzer system that reduced human connection to 15-minute increments, and me with no idea what to say to the son who'd saved me by betraying his brother. 3 weeks since the arrests, 21 days of sleeping through the night for the first time since Martha died. The insurance denial sat in my jacket pocket, folded into thirds, a $4.2 million reminder that justice and restitution weren't the same thing. I'd driven past the detention center twice before parking, circled the block, asking myself questions I couldn't answer. Do I thank him for the evidence or ask why he waited a year to come to me? Do I hold him accountable for silence or acknowledge he was manipulated? First victim, second. He was terrified, controlled, weaponized against his own family, but he still chose silence until he had no other choice. The buzzer sounded. Hewitt Vernon, room 3. A guard in Navy uniform escorted me down a corridor painted institutional beige. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My footsteps echoed on polished concrete. The air tasted metallic, recycled through vents that serviced 100 cells. Room 3 had plexiglass partition phones on either side, a metal stool bolted to the floor. Hamish sat on the other side, wearing orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too large. He looked tired, but unburdened 40 pounds of secrets lifted, leaving him lighter and smaller at the same time. We made eye contact, held it, looked away. I picked up the phone on my side. He mirrored the action. The receiver smelled like disinfectant and 1,000 desperate conversations. Silence stretched for 10 seconds. You look terrible, I said. You look older. 3 weeks of sleeping again will do that. Turns out rest shows every year you've lived. Hamish almost smiled. Almost. They're treating me okay. Probation officer says I'll likely be released to house arrest next week pending trial. Roland told me. Conditional release monitoring bracelet weekly check-ins. Better than I deserve. I didn't argue with him. We sat with that truth between us like the plexiglass transparent necessary separating. I keep thinking about February, Hamish said after a long pause. February 18th. That's when I should have called you. Elio came to my apartment after work, sat at my kitchen table, and said Mom's jewelry was the solution. I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you come to me then? Hamish's hand tightened around the phone. Because I owed $78,000 to people who don't accept payment plans, and Elio knew it. He'd known for months. Helped me hide it from you paid off. Some of it made himself my lifeline before I realized he was building leverage. Gambling debts. Another manipulation I'd never seen. He owned my shame before I realized he was weaponizing it, Hamish continued. By the time he said Mom's name and solution in the same sentence, I was already trapped. So I started recording instead of asking for help. How do you forgive someone for choosing fear over trust when fear had been weaponized against them? How do you hold your child accountable while acknowledging they were a victim first? You're right, I said. February, you should have come to me the moment he threatened you. You should have trusted me over your fear. Hamish's eyes went wet, but no tears fell. I know. You didn't. That choice cost us both. Cost your mother justice for 9 months. Cost me sleep and sanity and the ability to protect you when you needed it. I know, Hamish repeated. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Good. I shifted the phone to my other ear. Because I'm not ready to. Maybe I won't ever be completely, but you're here now, being honest, facing consequences. That matters. We start there. Hamish nodded, wiped his eyes with his free hand. Where do we go from there? I don't know yet. One conversation at a time. One honest thing after another until we figure out what's left. The guard tapped his watch. 15 minutes elapsed. Connection time over. I'll come back next week, I said. You don't have to. I know, I will anyway. We hung up the phone simultaneously. Hamish stood, nodded once, let the guard escort him back through the secured door. I watched until he disappeared, then walked back through the beige corridor to my car. At home, I spent an hour tidying the living room. The scratch marks on the hallway wall where Elio struggled stayed. Paint touch-up could wait. The broken lamp sat in pieces in the garage. Hamish's bedroom door stood open like a question I couldn't answer yet. I gathered the 1985 Crawford Madden files from the dining table where Roland had returned them after evidence copying. 40-year-old paper edges yellowed Martha's careful filing labels, still legible. Madden loan, March 1985, important. The storage room sat off the kitchen 10 by 12 feet of labeled boxes and wooden filing chests. Martha's organizational system, everything dated, everything preserved, everything in its place. I'd teased her about it for decades, called her the archive queen. Never understood why she needed to keep every receipt, every document, every proof of transaction. I opened her wooden chest, the one she'd used for 40 years, cedar-lined brass hinges she'd oiled annually. The 1985 files had lived here until I'd retrieved them unconsciously on November 15th. I slid them back into their designated slots, secured the latch. Sitting on the storage room floor where Martha used to organize decades of paperwork, I understood that love sometimes looks like obsessive filing systems and labeled boxes, unglamorous preservation that outlives the person who loved you. You kept these for 40 years, I said to the quiet room. Not because you knew I'd need them, but because preserving truth was your way of loving me. My voice echoed off storage boxes labeled in her handwriting, tax returns, 1985 to 1990, medical records, Vernon, home improvements, receipts. I never understood why you labeled everything dated. Everything kept every receipt. Now I do. The cedar chest smelled like her closet still did lavender and thyme. You saved me from the grave, Martha. Your habits became my defense. I closed the chest and locked it. The sun was setting over the gulf, painting the kitchen windows gold and orange. The house still carried scars from November 15th, but for the first time in 3 weeks I thought about tomorrow instead of yesterday. The sentencing was read on a Tuesday in March, 11 minutes after the judge called the courtroom to order. I know the exact duration because I counted from the hallway, hand-pressed flat against the plaster wall outside courtroom 3B, watching the second hand on the clock above the water fountain, while my son's future was decided 8 feet away behind soundproof glass. 8 to 12 years. Conspiracy, extortion, and second-degree murder. The prosecutor had accepted a plea arrangement that removed the premeditation argument in exchange for a guaranteed conviction. Roland had explained the logic a certain 8 years serves justice better than a gambled acquittal. I had agreed without enthusiasm, the way you agree to amputation because the alternative is worse. I didn't go inside. That was deliberate. Some forms of witnessing do more damage than they prevent, and I'd already seen enough of my son's face in the months since November to last whatever years I had remaining. Let the record show I was present in the building. That was sufficient. I drove home along the coast, with both windows down, no radio. Nothing between me and the Gulf air moving inland off the water. The car smelled like the pine air freshener Martha had clipped to the vent in 2021, and I'd never removed. By now it held no scent at all, just the shape of her habit preserved past its usefulness. I thought about useful things. Hamish's probation hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Leland had agreed to testify as a character witness, which struck me as extraordinary. The man who'd spent 40 years cultivating a grudge, now speaking on behalf of the family he'd once planned to destroy. Life rarely produces symmetry that clean without some cost attached. I hadn't identified the cost yet. I assumed it would surface. The house on Pelican Bay Drive looked exactly as I'd left it 3 hours earlier. The mockingbird was working the hedge again. Mrs. Torres had left something on the porch, a covered dish, a note tucked under the rim. I carried it inside without reading either. Martha's chair sat in its corner by the window. The bird feeder she'd hung from the live oak out front still had seed in it. I'd refilled it the previous Sunday without thinking the same way. I answered Hamish's calls on Sunday afternoons and drank coffee with Leland on weekday mornings. Habits don't wait for grief to finish before they reassemble themselves. I sat in her chair until the sun moved off the water and the light in the room shifted from gold to ordinary. 8 years minimum, one son rebuilding under supervision, one neighbor becoming something I didn't yet have a word for, one empty chair that still held its shape. I'd built 40 years of structures designed to outlast the people who used them. I was only beginning to understand that some things you build are meant to outlast you instead. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people we trust most can hurt us deepest. But that doesn't mean we stop trusting. It means we learn to trust wisely. Looking back, I wish I'd paid closer attention. Elio's questions about estate planning, Hamish's sudden distance, Martha's symptoms that didn't add up. I was an engineer who solved structural problems but missed the cracks in my own family. Don't make my mistake: when something feels wrong, investigate. Love doesn't mean blind trust. Family betrayal is a wound that never fully heals, but it teaches profound truths. This family story showed me that documentation saves lives. Martha's meticulous record-keeping became my defense. It taught me that resentment costs more than reconciliation, as Leland and I learned after wasting 40 years. I believe God put me through this trial to show me that love changes shape but doesn't disappear. The truth will always surface. If this family story resonated with you, leave a comment. Have you experienced family betrayal or seen justice delayed but delivered? Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about standing up for what's right. Thank you for staying until the very end. While some details have been fictionalized for storytelling, the core lessons about family betrayal, truth, and redemption are what I hope stay with you.